Hello and welcome to Week 3, Module 1 of English 1302, Summer Edition. All right, this week we are taking a look at the actual research report that we're going to be writing. I know that we introduced it last week. This week we're going to cover more about it, and we're going to take a look at some of the basic features of a research report and get into what that means. All right, so by now you should have read both of the Shirley Jackson stories and done the discussion questions. If you find that you can't get to the assignments, you need to make sure that you go back and listen to all the lectures because the ability to get into those assignments is directly tied to listening to that first week's lecture. In fact, going forward, some of our very first lectures for the next modules will be tied, all those assignments will be tied to listening to those lectures, which means that you have to go in, actually physically listen to the lecture before you will be allowed to have access to those assignments. So be sure to do that because they are important. They are the only way I have of directly speaking to you because we're in an online course and we meet at any time, which means we don't have a set time to have a lecture, which is why the discussion boards are also important for things like the compare and contrast, where we actually discuss the two stories and their meanings and whatnot. The discussion questions are important on an individual basis for you to turn those in because that's where I can tell if you're on the right track with understanding the stories. I caution you again to please don't use AI to answer those questions because if you can't write the the research reports because you didn't read the stories or you didn't have a good understanding of them because you let AI answer for you, it's going to not end well. And I have a unique knack for being able to figure out when someone is using AI to write their paper. So if you use AI to do your general assignments, it's just not going to end well. That's not a personal challenge. That's just a caution. So let's get into what we're going on over this week. So again, you should have by now read and answered the discussion questions for the lottery and the possibility of evil. These are the two stories that we are basing our research report on. And when I say that, if you listened to last week's lecture, you know that the prompts involve asking about real world situations that are tied back to some of the themes and underpinnings of the two stories. I did want to point something out, and again, important when you look at the stories, when you open them up and look at them, you've got the instructions, you've got the audio, you've got the actual PDF of the story, the discussion questions, and then on every single story that I have in this course, there will be references. These are the citations right here that you will use on either your MLA Works Cited or the APA references page, depending on what paper we're doing. So for example, for the Shirley Jackson paper, we'll be using MLA format. And for the Vonnegut paper, we'll be using APA format. And then for the final paper, you will be able to choose whether you want to use APA or MLA. It'll be your choice. But what you have here is the works cited entry for this story. You don't have to go out and find it online. You don't have to ask Google or chat to uh, create that reference for you. It's right here. And it will be on all of the stories. And this will be the reference that I will expect to see on your stories. All you have to do is copy paste this into your either works cited or references page, depending on which format, and then make sure that it's double spaced. Because if you notice, it's already correctly formatted for the hanging indent, which is the same in both APA and MLA. So there you go. There, I will probably remind you of that throughout the rest of the semester, but I wanted to make sure that I pointed it out and did not forget to. Okay, so you know where all the assignments are, and they are all here in the assignment folder. I will go over what assignments are going to be due later this week at the end, but I wanted to go through the information that is here on Blackboard. So I do have videos when possible for the different stories. Hopefully, you've found this and maybe watched the story of the lottery. This is actually a great rendition of it. This was a student film back in the late 60s that was made. There's actually a famous, at least one famous actor in there. I'll let you try to decide who it is. Probably, you probably don't know him very well, but he was pretty famous in his time. But one of the younger actors. But this is a good video, depiction of the lottery. I don't have a good depiction of the possibility of evil. There hasn't been one made yet. And to be fair, the possibility of evil is one of Shirley Jackson's more obscure short stories, although it has becoming more and more popular in the last 10 years. Certainly since I've been using this course, I found it, there was nothing on it. Now there's all kinds of things on it. So if you find a video that you like and you want to share it with me, that would be great. But I've scoured and I haven't found one that I thought was good. So there's that. There's also the recommended additional readings for this module. Now, assuming you bought the book and still have access to it, you can get to chapter 22 anytime. That is where the MLA style guide is in chapter 22. And then if you look, there is a research module in the book that you can get to. It's in the table of contents on the left side menu of the ebook. Uh, we I think most of the chapters that we looked at are in that research module. Certainly a few of them are. But there are other chapters that you could read for more information about how to write research papers. It's not necessary, it's just recommended. So if you didn't get the book and you don't have the free trial anymore, it's okay. I have provided some good information here for you as well. All right, so let's take a look at the basic features of a research report. It's pretty simple stuff, really. If you had ever been in my 1301 class, you would know that this was more of an elaborate, multicolored thing when we first start talking about research papers or papers in general. And it is, since I have moved through the courses, it's become much more defined. But first one is make sure that you have an introduction with a clearly stated thesis. That's where your thesis goes. For a well-written college paper that you're just trying to get through your class with, you want to put your thesis statement at the end of your introduction. When you start getting into more creative writing and that sort of thing, should you take it, and most people don't, that's when we start learning about putting our thesis uh, in the conclusion or somewhere else in the paper, especially when you're writing complicated arguments for a hostile audience. So for our purposes, we really do want the introduction in the thesis at the beginning of the paper. You want your reader to know what you're answering. That's where you talk about the prompt and you talk about how your answer is your thesis, and you also will mention your three pieces of evidence that back up your thesis in the introduction. We're going to talk about thesis statements here in a minute. Description of the subject. Make sure you give a brief description of what the subject matter is and why the thesis is important to the topic. That goes after your introduction. In a college level research report, you're going to have more than just 5 paragraphs. Um, For 1301, you should have written basically what amounts to a 5-paragraph theme. We have an introduction, a conclusion, and 3 body paragraphs, each paragraph discussing one piece of evidence. For the research report, you're going to go a little bit deeper. You might have more than one paragraph about each piece of evidence that you're talking about, that you're discussing, because there's just more to discuss. It's also recommended that, like I said, after your introduction, you have basically a description of subject paragraph where you talk about and give a little bit more explanation of what it is, your topic is, and what it means, and maybe some definitions of it if you need to there. And then you move into talking about the pieces of evidence that you're using to prove your argument. That's where your body is. The body is those paragraphs where you're discussing your proof, your evidence. That's where you're supporting your thesis with the research that you're going to do. And I know we say research, and research can be a big, scary word, But in honesty, this is just going out and finding good academic, credible sources to support your thesis. That's what our research entails. Uh, if you continue on, depending on the topic or the career path that you choose in college, your research may be much more. The last big research paper I wrote was my thesis for my master's, and I believe my references pages were 13 pages long, I think. So I did a lot of research. But that's not what we're expecting for this paper. For this paper, we only expect 2 academic sources, and then you can have as many other sources as you want, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Finally, you're going to have your conclusion. So you've got your introduction, your description of subject, your body of your research paper, which is where you discuss all your evidence, your conclusion, where you're going to restate your thesis statement and the evidence that you used and say that you've proved it. So remember, the most basic thing about a paper is you're going to say what you're going to say. That's the introduction. You're going to say it. That's the body. And then conclusion is you're going to say what you said. I know that may be a little bit simplistic, but it is the basic. So there you go. Basic features of a research report. Now, I've got a little bit more information here about what that really means. And it's these different links here, which are actually pretty good. So let's take a look at the research report writing guide. So this is where I have set up a little bit more in depth what some of the key steps to writing a research paper are. Step 1 is understanding the assignment. Make sure that you read thoroughly the entirety of the prompt. Know which prompt you're going to be using, okay? Make sure that you understand how you're answering it and make sure that you have written a good working thesis. Remember, the prompt is the question you're being asked. Like, it's what you have to answer. Your thesis statement is the answer. So if I asked you, why is the sky blue? Your thesis statement would be the answer to why the sky is blue. So you're thinking to yourself, so then why do we have to write the rest of the paper? Well, if the thesis is the answer, and the thesis is the answer, the rest of your paper is proving why your thesis is correct. The rest of the paper is your argument, where you are talking about why your answer, your thesis statement, is correct. That's really all it is, and showing proof and evidence. So make sure you understand the assignment. That's the first thing. Choose a suitable topic. Well, fortunately for you, your topic has been chosen. That's what you're doing when you choose through your prompts. Now, this was set up also to help you when you don't really have a topic and you have to write a research report. And believe it or not, that could happen to you. It happened to me in college. It is very frustrating, but you could be prepared for it. So make sure you understand the assignment, choose a suitable topic. For you, it's going to be choosing a suitable way to answer it. That would be your thesis statement. You're going to conduct some preliminary research. You're going to gather initial information to refine your topic and develop a thesis statement. You have to have a thesis statement really to start researching. In other words, you have to have an idea, a working thesis statement, which is an idea of how you want to answer that prompt or that question before you can do any research, because how are you going to start looking for things if you don't know how you're answering the question? So you're going to do a little bit of research on it, and then you're going to develop your working thesis statement. That's step 4. You're going to craft a clear and concise thesis statement that summarizes the main point of your argument. In other words, that's the main point is your answer. So make sure that your thesis statement says that. It will also provide a hint to what your research is. Again, we'll talk about that. Your evidence, that is. We'll talk about that when we talk about what a good thesis statement is. Step 5 is then you're going to gather more evidence. You're going to go and do deeper research, perhaps, and find the specific information and data that supports your argument, which is your thesis statement. Um, Step 6 would be to create an outline. Now, some people don't like outlines. I am not here to tell you how to write your paper. Some people will just sit down and write it out, and then they will make a few edits, and that's what they will turn in. If you are able to do that, more power to you. I am not asking for things like an outline. But if you do find the benefit in writing an outline. I do, for me personally. This is a good way to organize your main points. Right, you start with your thesis statement, then you start with your 3 pieces of evidence, which should be in your thesis statement, and your paper kind of organizes itself from there. It's a good idea when you're writing for a college level paper to try to organize your thoughts before you just sit down and blindly write. Although I completely understand the benefit of doing that, a lot of times I will sit down because I don't like writing, believe it or not. And when I have to write a paper, which thank goodness is few and far between these days, I will sit down and I will start just uh, basically brainstorm blind writing where I'm just getting it all out on paper. And it usually starts with, I don't want to write this paper. I hate writing. And I just keep writing and writing and writing until I get all of that out of my system. And then eventually I will get to writing the paper, or at least writing out my ideas so that I can create an outline uh, and do some more research if I need to. So create an outline or brainstorm writing, whatever it is that you find more effective. I like outlines, you might not, your mileage will vary. Um, then you're going to write your first draft. So once you have an outline or even some brainstorm writing, then you can go back and create a draft with that. Make sure that you have your introduction with your thesis. Make sure that you've got your body paragraphs and a good conclusion. That's a good rough draft. Rough drafts are important to us because we will be using them to do peer review. And as mentioned before, and I will mention it again, if you don't participate in the peer review with a rough draft of some sort and review other people's papers, then you will lose 20 points off of your final major paper for that module. So it's very important. Peer review is a very important part of the process, and I've just had too many students in the past who decided they didn't feel like participating. I had half a class participate and half a class not, and it's really bad for the people who do take the time to get a rough draft turned in and would like some feedback on it, and they don't get any because other people just didn't feel like doing a rough draft. So just know that is part of the process. It's uh, not only would you get a 0 for not doing the rough draft or the peer review, you would also get 20 points taken off your final paper for that module. So please, please do a rough draft and the peer review. It is incredibly important. But that's where you're going to do your rough draft. You're going to cite your sources properly in step 8. This is where you'll be doing the required citation style for our purposes for this first paper. It's going to be MLA. There is also APA, which we'll be doing for the next paper. Chicago or Turabian style is not a source that we use in English, and so we really don't cover it, which is probably not the best. But if you are a history student or you're writing for a history paper, they will more than likely tell you you need to use Chicago or Turabian. If you're writing a paper for a math class or uh, possibly any kind of technical science paper, you'll probably be asked to use something called CSE. All of these styles can actually be found in our textbook in the back. MLA and APA for sure, but I do believe you can find Chicago, Turabian, and CSE. But also you can look those up on the OWL at Purdue, which is the online writing lab, which I do have a link for in the writing resources. So in any case, make sure you cite your sources properly. I will probably have a separate uh, lecture video about MLA that will come out later in this week. So the last step is, of course, to revise and edit. You go back and correct for mistakes. This is where it gets tricky and where students want to use something called Grammarly. Please do not use Grammarly. I know that Lee College provides Grammarly for free to you, and I don't care if you use it all day long in a social studies class or a math class or whatever other class, but you may not use it in your English class. If you have it up in your uh, bookmarks bar, if you have it installed as a function in your browser, please uninstall it as an extension. Please uninstall it, because if you answer a question on it, if it asks you if it wants you to fix your paper, it will show up as being AI generated, and that is simply not acceptable. So please, please, please do not use Grammarly. Use the spell checker or the grammar checker that comes with Word, if you're using Word, or Google Docs. They both have one. They're both fine. They've both sufficed for years. But if you use any sort of AI to say fix your paper, so for example, you need to be careful, because if you're in Google Docs and Gemini asks you, do you want to rephrase this? It may come up as being AI enhanced, and that will be bad news for you when it comes to your final paper, because there's no AI in this class, because it is an English class, and I cannot grade your work if a computer is fixing it first. And I am not a Luddite. I do believe that AI has a place, and in a place in our class, and we will talk about AI a little bit later. This is actually going to be kind of a long lecture um, with the assignments that we're doing this week, but please review for clarity, consistency and coherence uh, by yourself without the use of Grammarly. I promise you, the points lost for making a grammar or a spelling mistake that Grammarly might have caught will be far less than the points lost for having it pop for AI, because a zero is much harder to come back from than a couple points lost because you didn't maybe use the correct wording or your grammar was just a bit off. All right, I would much rather see a more authentic product from you than something that was polished by AI. Are you going to use AI in the real world? Yeah, probably. Yes, definitely, depending on your job. Is that fine to use it there when you're turning in something professional that you're being paid to do? I would say yes. But but if you don't know how to recognize when AI is wrong, it's not going to help you in the real world when you turn in something that AI did not fix correctly and you don't recognize it. Is AI getting better and better? Of course it is. Of course it is. But please, for your educational purposes, do not shortchange yourself by allowing AI to do your work for you. Um, that's all I really have to say about that. So make sure you revise and edit. That is why peer review is important. It's part of that revision and editing process. If somebody else catches a mistake that you made, that's fine. That's somebody else simply cannot be AI. And the reason for that, the reason we do peer review the way we do it, is because it helps you and it helps the person that is looking at your paper. If you're looking at someone else's paper, and you see a mistake, you are much, much, much more likely to recognize that mistake when you do it or if you do it. Or you're much less likely to make that mistake again if you catch somebody else doing it. And honestly, that's really the most important thing, is learning to recognize those mistakes before they're put out there in the world. So anything that somebody else can catch for you and you can fix, you have that opportunity to fix, just makes your grade better. I know it sounds like I'm arguing for AI, but I'm not. It's going to help train you to find those issues. It's going to help other people train to find those issues. And that's really what this class is about. Is learning to find the issues and fix them and do it properly without the need for artificial intelligence. All right, so those are the key steps to writing a research report. Let's see. Here, I think you can also find that in writing resources. This is actually a good video. I'm not going to go through the whole thing about uh, writing a research report. And this was put together
Hi
by
everyone.
a graduate student. When she, I think after she was a graduate student, she's talking about much bigger research projects here than ours, but the information that she gives is actually very worthy. So I would say give it a good listen. Some of it is going to be for you. You're going to be like, "No, that's not my style. I don't want to do that. I don't have time for that." That's fine. The papers that she's talking about writing here are large graduate level papers. However, a lot of that information can be applied here, so take the best and leave the rest as always, but it's worth 9 minutes of your time to listen to this if you are kind of in the dark about what writing a research paper entails. So that's a good video there. Now let's talk about developing a working thesis. Hopefully, a lot of this stuff is review for you guys. If you've been in 1301 already, which you should have, you've got this. So this is just a quick briefer. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Developing a working thesis. A working thesis is similar to your final thesis. The difference is that in a working thesis, you can change it. And in fact, you're kind of expected to. Because what happens if you have an idea of how to answer the question, right? That's your working thesis is, I think the answer to the question is this. Um, but what if you go out and do your research and you're looking for the evidence to back up your argument, your thesis statement, and you can't find it? What do you do then? Do you just keep looking? Do you just keep looking? I mean, you could. You could keep looking. But what if you seriously can't find that information? You should then consider changing your thesis statement because it's possible that your thesis statement is not correct. Remember, it's the answer to a question, it's your answer to a question. It's possible that your thesis statement isn't correct and that if all the evidence points to it not being correct, then you must change your thesis statement. Otherwise, you're just making stuff up. And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that any arguments we make are fully backed up, are fully backable by evidence. So that's why we call it a working thesis statement because it needs to be flexible. You need to be able to change it if the evidence that you're finding does not agree with it because it's possible that it's not correct. All right, so that's why it's a working thesis. You can revise. How can a working thesis be helpful in revising your final draft? Well, if you have to revise what your thesis statement, what you've based on what you found, then you have to revise your paper. So, um, here's a good way of making sure that your thesis statement makes sense, uh, or if it needs revision. Does my thesis sentence clearly state my argument or analysis? Are my supporting points emphasized? Does it present the structure of my paper? Your thesis statement should answer the question and basically tell the reader how you're going to prove it. Okay, and that sounds like a lot for one sentence, but I'm going to show you in just a second how it's not that bad. And then there's this little illustration of what a working thesis. So if your working thesis starts out here, it's kind of broad. The statement being like programs to help students with learning disabilities are lacking in American schools. That's a pretty broad sentence and not an incorrect one, right? That's a pretty good working thesis. So as this person has revised it and done research, their final thesis statement, when it's all said and done, is the problem for students with learning disabilities in American schools is that educators focus more attention on equality among students and less on actually helping those disabled students learn. That is a much more specific thesis statement. It goes from broad to specific because through their research they found that that seems to be the major problem, so they revised their working thesis to say this. It still says basically the same thing. This one, like I said, is just a little more focused. So there you go. So you can read through that. Some good information there. All right, so last but not least, we have Professor Smith's magic thesis formula. Now, before we get all excited, yes, the Professor Smith here is me. Um, but this is something that I wish that I had been told when I was in your shoes in college. Um, I didn't actually develop this until after I started having to teach people how to write a thesis statement. And let me just tell you, writing a thesis statement was the bane of my paper writing existence. To this day, I still don't like doing it. But this makes it a lot easier. So basically, the formula is right here. You're going to answer the question. If you remember that a thesis statement is the answer to the question, not the question itself. You should not have a question in your thesis statement. It should always be a statement, an answer. So the basic formula, because I kind of like formulas, you plug stuff in and you get an answer. The basic formula looks like this. The answer to the question is blank because of blank, blank, and blank. This right here is your thesis statement. Now, you can do any number of switcheroos and revisions and switch this up however you'd like, but as long as your thesis statement has the answer to the question is, in other words, this is the reason, this is why this is this way, or the sky is blue, that's the answer, right? What color is the sky? The sky is blue because of blank, blank, and blank. Why? What are 3 reasons the sky is blue? Well, the water level in the atmosphere, uh, the sun shining through and reflecting and refracting off of all of that water. Uh, and also, it's a filter. Our atmosphere is a filter for the darkness of space. That's These are 3 reasons why the sky is blue. But those would be your pieces of evidence. So again, the formula, the answer to the question is blank because of, and you don't have to say, obviously you wouldn't say the answer to the question is, but that is there to guide you to know that that's what you're supposed to put the answer to the question. All right, so here the sky is blue because of what is in the atmosphere, the amount of water in the atmosphere, and how much sunlight is present at the time. That's pretty basic, but it is there. That's the answer. The sky is blue is the answer, and these are the 3 pieces of evidence. I think this was a different color once upon a time, but uh, we can't have that color anymore. So, and the blanks can be as large as you need them to be. They don't have to be one word. They can be a short, small statement. It's whatever. But this is your basic thesis statement formula. You're going to just plug your information in here. As long as your thesis statement reflects the answer and 3 pieces of evidence, you're golden. So there you go. This is the formula, and I'm told it works for literally any kind of paper that you're going to write. It works for English, it works for history papers, sociology. I've had many students come back and tell me that it's worked for all of that. This seems pretty simple enough, at least to me now, after so many years of teaching this. But I tell you what, when I was in your shoes, and it wasn't that long ago that I was, um, it would have been nice to have been told that because my head exploded every time somebody told me I had to write a thesis. Now, we have some more information. I wanted to point out writing resources. Here is also where the Magic Thesis formula lives. There is the general writing help folder. I'm not going to go through all of this simply because this is a lot of information that you should have already had. There's a little schmoop video about how to write a killer thesis, how to write an introduction, also a good video. There's a word graveyard, which you guys should take a look at. In fact, I'll just open it up. These are words that you should not have in your paper. Nowadays is not a word. Please do not use it. I don't care what the dictionary says. Oftentimes, it's just a turn of phrase. Towards should be toward. There is no S at the end of towards. Kinda and wanna, of course, are not proper English and they are not real words. That slang should not be in your paper. Must have, could have, would have. It should be must have, could have, would have. This is not proper grammar. Majority, when you use the word majority, it should be a majority or the majority, not majority, like majority of Americans go to Walmart. That is not proper English. Back then, back in the day, this is not improper. It's simply old and cliched. So you should try to have a specific date or time frame. The same thing with nowadays. It should be currently or today or have a specific time frame, like since 1976 or since 1990 or since 2010, whatever. But it shouldn't be nowadays. You don't want to use slang words like woke, shook, or any other casual language. No cap. Don't use it. A lot should have a space in between. And then finally, my biggest pet peeve, besides the word nowadays, is contradictions or contradictions, my apologies, contractions. Sorry. So, contractions should not be used in a formal academic essay, which is what we are writing and what you will be writing for the rest of your college career. And what I mean by contractions, they should be spelled out. So, instead of saying the word don't, spell out do not. So anything with an apostrophe that is a shortened version of the word don't, I'd, we'd, they'd, shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't, all of these words that you usually use an apostrophe, uh, please spell out both words. It makes you sound like a better writer immediately. And if I'm honest, it will pad your word count because the word don't counts as one word, but do not counts as two words. So if you're worried about that, but honestly, it's just your better writers, your better writing does not have contractions. We use contractions when we speak. We can't help it. We're trying to communicate ideas faster, and contractions do help with that. And in casual writing, uh, it's fine because that is how we speak. But in formal academic writing, which is what you are doing, contractions have no place and should not be used unless you are quoting someone. And even if you are quoting someone, you should really, unless it's an incredibly important quote from them, you should not use contractions. You should try to find a way to not use it. So there you go. That's the word graveyard. There is the research writing guide, which we went through, is also found here. There's some spelling and other things, but um, really, that's the writing resources. There's one last thing I wanted to talk about here, and I chose it last after that is because it's about using Wikipedia. I'm hopeful that most of you have heard throughout your academic lives that using Wikipedia, referencing Wikipedia is bad. Now, it's true. You should never, ever, ever cite Wikipedia as your source because anybody can edit most of the articles on Wikipedia. There are a few big articles, important articles that have been locked down by the mods, the moderators. But there are many, many, many articles on Wikipedia, most of which are editable by anybody. Now, the reason that is on Wikipedia, and we'll just take a look at it real quick. Wikipedia allows for anybody uh, to edit because as long as they give their sources. So let's see if we can, I guess we'll just take a look at Corpus Christi College. It's a neat picture, but that's just a picture. If I could just, you know what? Let's just take a look at soccer. That's a good one because of the World Cup. So here's the article. Typed in soccer, comes up association football. That's fine. We'll just take a look at this. So on this article, you see a lot of blue words. These are the hyperlinks. If you hover over them, it gives you a bit more information. For example, if you hover over circumference here, it gives you the definition of circumference. If you hover over the International Football Association board, it tells you what that is. FIFA, a lot of these are definitions, which is nice when you're reading. If you see a number right here, that is the citation for the information that it just gave. So for this sentence, it says that the Football Association, founded in London in 1863, which published the first set of rules for the sport that same year. So that's a bit of information that most people don't know. I didn't know that the Football Association was founded in 1863, and I wouldn't imagine anybody else, any of you knew that either, maybe. But what this is doing is this person who put this information in here gave this as their citation. Now, Wikipedia doesn't really use MLA or APA for their citation, so please don't use Wikipedia's type. This is more like Chicago or Turabian style. But if you hover over that, it's going to tell you where it came from, and it says from the original on the 13th of September 2024. It was retrieved on the 13th of April 2025. So this is from the British Library and it's archived. Now, if you hover over that, every time you see a number like that, it's going to give you a reference. That's where they got their information from. So if I can't use this article, if I can't say, oh, I got it from Wikipedia, what do? Well, if I want to use the information about 1863 and the foundation of the Football Association, I can click on that and it will take me to the bottom of the page. You can also scroll down here, so you just scroll down. But this is where all the references are. And if you want to try to get to that reference, you can possibly click on it. Let's see what it says. There it is. This is the reference, and it takes us to the Wayback Machine because it was archived, which it told us. So this is from way back in August 27 of 2013 that this information was there. That this was the social science blog is where that information came from at the British Library. This is what you would reference on your paper if you use that information. And that is how you use Wikipedia correctly. If you look up here, you may have noticed there are PDFs here. I believe if we click on that, it would take us to the original PDF. In this case, it's the laws of the game. And sorry, I do use dark mode, so it's going to look funky. But there you go. That'll take you to where it was. And thank God for the Wayback Machine because there's so much information that would be lost uh, if we didn't have it. So that is the proper way to use Wikipedia. You don't ever, ever, ever reference Wikipedia, but you can go in and use those references there, those citations there. And you do need to be careful. Make sure that whatever reference it is directing you to is or looks legitimate because people are weird and they will put anything up and then they will go through a lot of trouble to make you believe what they put. Why? I don't know. It's whatever. But that's how you properly use Wikipedia. Now, this is a video that basically explains uh, what I had to say about that and maybe a little bit more. So it's actually a good reinforcement for what I just talked about. But that is all that's in here. Now, let's talk about the assignments for this week before we get too much further. Well, I guess we're actually pretty further. But uh, last week we looked at the chapters and the compare and contrast. This week we are looking at 4 more assignments. I do want to emphasize that after this module, for modules 2 and 3, we will not have anywhere near as many assignments as we've had for this module. Remember, we were going through a lot of the information that was in these chapters regarding how to write research reports and other things. So we're just not going to have that with modules 2 and 3. I promise you there will not be as many assignments. However, we do have the Shirley Jackson Psychological Horror Discussion Board, which basically, I'm having you read this Beginner's Guide to Psychological Horror. It's actually kind of interesting. And then you're going to answer in your initial post these 2 questions, just 2. And the first one is, what Shirley Jackson story, The Lottery or the Possibility of Evil, do you think best fits the psychological horror genre and why? Based on what you read here. It's not that long, I promise. And then the second question is, what aspects or events of the year 2025, in other words, last year, would you include in a psychological horror story? And you need to name at least two, and then of course respond to two classmates' posts by the secondary date. So that's actually kind of interesting. I'm actually really interested to see what you guys had to say in the compare and contrast. So I'm looking forward to looking at that. The second assignment, and sort of important one, this is where I'm asking you to tell me which of the essay prompts, either number one or number two, and they're both right here. Which one are you planning on answering or attempting to answer with your research report? And I would also like for you to try to give me a working thesis. In other words, I need you to tell me which prompt you're going to answer, give me what your answer is, and then give me what you think are going to be your three pieces of evidence. Now, I understand that you haven't probably done any research on this yet, and that's fine. That's why it's a working thesis. I just want to make sure that you're on the right track for writing a thesis. And remember, when you're working on your working thesis, when you're writing it, if it is longer than a couple of sentences, maybe in this case, it could be longer than one sentence. If it's more than one sentence, definitely more than two sentences, then it is too long. And you need to go back and relook at that. If you find that you're writing your working thesis and it's like half a page, that's way too long. So go back and revise it. But that's this assignment is telling me which essay prompt you want to answer and then giving me a working thesis. And what I will do is I will take a look at those uh, on Wednesday or just after Wednesday. As soon as they come in, I'll be taking a look at those all week and getting back with you and making sure that you're on the right track with writing a working thesis. And this will be the only time we do this for the papers because, again, I'm just making sure that you are able to pull back into writing after having taken 1301, whether it was last semester or 10 years ago for some people, whichever one. So that's really just a check for you. I will grade this as soon as possible and get it back to you so that you can use it for writing your rough draft. The third assignment that we have is research AI and the influence of information. And this is actually a combined assignment. So this one's going to take you a couple minutes to do and a little bit of effort. Sorry, not sorry. But this is going to talk about how you can use AI to help you with your research. Like I said, I'm not a Luddite. I do enjoy AI. I just don't think you should be using it to write your papers. However, you can use it to help you find sources, to help you reason out some things. You can always use AI for exactly what it is, the chat, to help you talk about things out, talk things out. So what you're going to be taking a look at is a couple of different types of articles. One is they're over the same basic information, but they're two different ones. The first one is what we call a popular media source article. It's from Psychology Today, which sounds like, why would that sounds like it's very clinical, but in fact, it's not. Psychology Today is a magazine written for the everyday person who's interested in psychology, not just uh, psychologists or psychiatrists. But this is an example of a popular media source. So this is an article there that you're going to take a look at that. And then there's also an example of a scholarly article. In other words, something that was written on an academic scholarly article, something that has been peer reviewed, is in the database of journals. And that is what this looks like. And again, it's an article over the same topic as this one, but this one is scholarly. And I'm going to ask you to try to read through it. I understand it's going to be hard to read. It's hard for me to read it, let me be honest. But I mean, I say it's hard for me to read it. It's not that I don't understand the words, it's that it gets kind of a bit much. So, but I'm going to ask you to read through it. There's actually some interesting things in here. Um, Try to do your best and read through there. And then this is what you're going to do. After you read both articles, you're going to respond to the following. You're going to um, identify at least three differences between the two articles. And those differences could be something as simple as, length or language, etc. You're going to tell me how the tone, structure, and evidence and citations and audience and language differ. These things. How are these things different between the two articles? And which source would be more appropriate for college research and why? So I want you to answer that. Now, this is the second part of this assignment. Like I said, I know it's a little bit lengthy, but trust me, there's a process. So you're going to use one of the prompts, whichever prompt that you think you're going to answer for the essay. You're going to use it here to brainstorm some ideas. Now, there's going to be people who are like, but Miss, I don't want to use AI. I don't like using AI. That's fine. I understand. If you only ever use AI for this assignment, then that's fine. If you never use AI again in the class, I'm okay with that. But I also have people who are like, but I like using AI. I want to use AI appropriately. This is how we do it. So you're going to use it to help you brainstorm, uh, or you can use it to do one of these, two of these things. I want you to either brainstorm topic angles, research, develop research questions, identify search terms, organize essay points, discuss the source credibility, and clarify difficult ideas. You're going to use one of those prompts. Of course, you don't want to use it to write your essay. So what you're going to submit is your AI interaction. You want to save it by copying and pasting the chat onto a document or screenshot it and upload that. And I want you to identify which tool you use. In other words, did you use ChatGPT? Did you use Gemini? Did you use Grok? Did you use Claude? Which one did you use to help you with this? Um, and what content was AI generated? In other words, what did you take a screenshot of what the chatbot, the AI, helped you with? And then finally, the last part is just write me a paragraph. I know it says 250 words, but write me a paragraph about what you learned about the differences between scholarly and popular sources, like which is which, and what did the AI help you do or not, as the case may be. Um, did you like the responses? Were they weak? Were they not? How did you feel about them? So says, how might conformity or social influence affect the way people trust information online? I think that's a good one. What ethical boundaries exist and how did this assignment shape your thinking? Now, obviously, these don't have to be answered like specifically in that order, but I'd like you to respond to some of these questions with that. So this is kind of, I will admit, this is a bit much for this assignment, but I think it's important. Again, identifying the difference between popular media source and academic source is important. Google is a popular media source. It will bring up mostly popular media sources. Google Scholar will bring up academic sources, and if you can get to them. If you also need to, you can go to the library. And I believe I will have a separate video on that, and I'll put that in the writing resources to help you with that. Okay, last but not least for this week, the assignment here is the peer review. All right, and this is a little tricky. When you click into it, you must upload your rough draft first before you can uh, do any kind of review. So if you don't have a rough draft to upload, you cannot review someone else's paper. And I think that's part of the problem I've had in the past is people are just like, oh, I don't feel like doing a rough draft. It's not how I operate. Well, for this class, I need you to do a rough draft. And that rough draft can be something as simple as your thesis statement or your introduction with an outline of how you want to answer the rest of the paper. That's fine. I really just want as much as possible of your paper. Something that somebody can take a look at and say, okay, you're going in the right direction, or I like this, or I don't like that, or you need to fix this, or whatever. If you're one of those real go-getter people who I think are amazing, and you're able to have your rough draft all turned in or mostly done by the time this is due, then that would be great. The more you can give the person reviewing your rough draft, the better. But you have to turn in something as a rough draft before you will be allowed to look at somebody else's paper to review. So the way this works is that's the first due date is Friday. So the rough draft is due by Friday. So you need to turn that in first. And then you need to review somebody else's paper by the 20th. Now, we're going to see how this works out. I want to say that uh, it should open up after midnight on the 20th. So there's a very short time for you to review someone's paper, and it will be probably Saturday during the day. But that is how this works. I wanted to give you guys as much time as possible to turn in a rough draft. So that's why I said by Friday, by midnight. If this doesn't work out well on this paper, we will revise it for the next one. But you won't be able to review somebody's paper probably until after that time. Your mileage may vary. We're going to see how this works. This is kind of a new feature with Blackboard, and I'm not sure that they've worked out all the kinks, but we're going to try it. I used it last semester, but I was in class with people face to face, so it was much easier to do. So you're going to turn in your rough draft first, and then you're going to be presented with the option to review somebody's paper, which you should definitely do. Now, when you review someone's paper, there are 9 questions that I'd like you to answer about their paper, whether it's a full rough draft or just an outline. So be sure to answer each of these questions. And you don't have to go into great detail to answer the questions. Just let them know how they did. And do be kind because you are speaking to another human being about their work. But also, don't forget, not mentioning a problem is not kind because not telling somebody that there's a problem is just as bad as being mean about it. So be sure you let them know that there's a problem with something, but just do it in the kindest way possible. But you're going to answer all 9 of those questions, and you're going to I think you can either upload it as a document or you can answer those questions in the submission form here. And that will be a complete peer review, turning in your rough draft and reviewing someone else's paper. And remember, you have to do this or there'll be a loss of 20 points. Now, if something happens and this gets all janky, uh, which hopefully it won't, um, then we will revisit that next week. I'm not without mercy. But also, if you get in here and we have an uneven number of people, we will deal with that when it happens. So I will keep an eye on this week and make sure that this is running smoothly because I really want it to because peer review is important. A lot of students tell me they actually enjoy peer review. So there you go. That's what we're doing this week, working on the peer review. We do have the AI assignment, which is it's kind of a big assignment. So make sure you spend some time with that. The psychological horror, not so much. It's actually kind of fun. But that's what we've got going on this week. So as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. I will have information up about MLA formatting, probably another video that I'll put in the writing resources. I'll let you know when that's up on the announcements. Please be sure that you're reading the announcements and listening to lectures. I know this one was kind of long, and I do apologize. They're not usually this long. There's a lot of information to go over. So have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you next week.